All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us again here on the Cyber Spotlight. I'm your host, Stephen Boughton, and today I'm happy to be joined by Darren Argyle from Singapore. He is the founder and the chairman of the Cyber Leadership Institute, as well as the group CISRO of the Standard Chartered Bank. Thank you so much for joining me today, Darren.
Yeah, hi, Stephen. Pleasure to join you.
Why don't you just explain to our audience quickly who you are, where you're from, and I guess what you're up to in Singapore these days?
Yeah, Darren Argyle. I've been to Singapore for the last 2.5 years, working for Standard Chartered Bank. My career history for the last 25 years has been cybersecurity, and that's what I do in the bank. I'm in the second line of defense, and I'm as you said, the chief group information security risk officer. So responsible for our cyber capability in the second line. And also, I'm the chairman and co-founder of the Cyber Leadership Institute, which is in Australia. We founded that in 2018, which is all about building the next generation of cyber leaders. And they're the two things that keep me busy, apart from my family, but the family's pretty distributed these days with COVID. So I've got my wife who's still in Australia and my daughters are in the UK. And so like most people, we're having problems connecting with family, but we're hoping to get together at Christmas, so that'll be something nice to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds like the modern one take on the modern family for sure.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, but your work is obviously super interesting to us, and so we'll get a little bit into that. But I also want to know a bit more about kind of who you are and your passions behind the cybersecurity aspect of your job. So I guess if you had to explain to your job to somebody in an elevator, and maybe they're a little pushy and wanted to know, and you only had a short amount of time to explain it to them, what is it that you would say that you do?
So I would say my job is to protect an organization's crown jewels. And I would say it that way because it kind of inspires a bit of curiosity. And I would say crown jewels because it's not necessarily that simple, but everybody knows that crown jewels is something important. So that's where I would describe it. And then I'd say it's about protecting the crown jewels. And the way that we protect the crown jewels is about, first of all, understanding where the things are that are of value, that the bad guys want to go after. And then it's all about putting these level of controls in place to defend and protect the organization from those being accessed. And some of those put friction in the system to stop them getting there, because it's ultimately a game from getting in to get into the crown jewels. And we have to find a way of slowing them down or stopping them in the tracks. And then once they're in, because sometimes inevitably the bad guys will get in, it's all about detecting and responding as soon as possible to prevent them getting to the crown jewels. Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. And that's the game, backwards and forwards. Mm-hmm. Them getting in, we finding them. And obviously the idea is to get faster and faster at either defending or spotting them when they get in. And that's essentially what my role is. And I organize a team that does that, assures that. And also we do gamification to actually simulate those attacks. We have these kind of blue team, red team tests that go on in organizations, which is quite fun from a measurement of are we getting better or worse, looking at it from ourselves point of view.
Right, yeah. And I think a lot of people would make them want to ask a lot more questions, maybe try and figure out.
And then the lift opens, and then he's like, right, okay.
So I gotta go. Yeah, yeah, definitely. What would you say the most satisfying part about your job is, maybe at both your roles, with the Leadership Institute and then at the bank, as far as like a security satisfactory and from a security standpoint?
Yeah, I think the most satisfying part of my role definitely has to be the kind of mentoring side of things and seeing people develop their skills and thrive in their roles. I'm now in a role in the bank managing a team of close to 170 people, so quite a large team, and I've got my leadership underneath me. So to make sure that everybody in that team is optimized, achieving their objectives and delivering, secure services, secure, resilient services to the bank is crucially important. So that's a key part of what I do in the bank. And obviously, the other part of what's satisfying for my role as well is being able to deliver on our commitments in terms of delivering a secure service as well. So meeting our metrics and measures. Mm-hmm. But the most important part for me is definitely seeing the development through mentorship. And it's something that I put a lot of time in my own personal time. And it's also something that we deliver as part of the company that I'm a chairman of, which is the Cyber Leadership Institute based in Australia. We serve the 35 countries around the world, and we are developing the next generation of cyber leaders, which is really focused on not so much the technical skills, although that's part of it, but very much about developing leadership skills and the soft skills. And to seeing people and getting that feedback from people when they've been on the courses and programs is very satisfying, because you know that you've really helped people. But bringing those people together in communities, everybody wants to be part of a community, and seeing them communicate with one another and helping one another is what's absolutely the most satisfying thing of my role, I think, that I do today.
Right. Yeah, and that makes sense. And I'm excited to get to learn a little bit more about your work building that next generation that you talked about in just a minute here. Yeah. What do you think is the biggest misconception from the business side of the house, maybe at the bank, that it is that the cyber risk team does day to day? Like, what do they think of you guys that maybe might not be exactly accurate?
Yeah, well, I think it's true of the businesses. I think it's true of most people who would look at the cybersecurity team. I guess they believe that we're there to defend the business, as we are there to do everything for them, really. The reality is, if you look at the maturity of an organization in terms of its cybersecurity capability, if you were to ask some simple questions, like who is responsible for cybersecurity, a very low maturity organization would say, I don't know. Right? Yeah. A more mature organization would say, oh, it's the cybersecurity team, and that's what the business might do and everything else. But the most mature organization would say it's everyone's responsibility. So the biggest misconception is for the business and all the people who work in the business is to think that it's somebody else's responsibility for security, when in fact it's their responsibility for security. So I think that's the biggest misconception, is it's everybody's responsibility. Everybody must play their part. Because most of the attacks that come through today are through simple phishing emails. So we're reliant on the individuals themselves to spot these malicious intrusions into an organization, including the bank and any organization. So we need to instill that sense of ownership of cyber. So that's probably the biggest misconception, is it's not their responsibility, it's ours. So.
Yeah, well put. I like how you said that, and yeah, a lot of people would just dump it off. Well, they're keeping us safe, so I can just be a cowboy from home. Back. But yeah, it's
exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Since COVID started, you already alluded to a few things that have changed. But what's maybe in your job with the Cyber Leadership Institute and with the bank? What are the main things that have changed because of COVID for you guys?
So I'll talk about the Cyber Leadership Institute for a second, because that's interesting that what happened with that business, because it's online, digital, remote, and therefore doesn't have a physical presence. So the impact on the training side of that business has actually escalated on the basis that a lot more people are at home now, not going in, they might have more time because they're not traveling into the office. And it seems to be that because it's online, digital and remote, not affected by the physical world, it's thriving as a business. So that was an interesting element. And we know that training businesses that offer those services online and digital and even self-paced, which is what we do, thrive through times of COVID, because we know there are winners and losers with COVID in terms of the business. So that's the positive thing from that side of things. From a bank perspective, remote working brings its challenges, obviously, from a physical perspective, and that's how it can manifest in terms of physical security. With remote working, it's okay if you're working in a kind of office space where I am that's segregated from the rest of the home, but that's not the luxury that everybody's got. Some people are working in households where potentially they might even have competitors, that might be their spouses in the same house, or even children that are grown up. So there's the confidentiality issues of things shared. But obviously, and if the technology of the organization isn't up to scratch as well in terms of being able to manage secure access to an organization from a remote location, then that would bring its own challenges as well. We're fortunate at the bank from having, good secure principles in terms of, secure authentication, VPN services, and even the concept of zero trust, which allows you to connect securely to, even malicious connections, and being able to decide whether that's something that you want to connect to or not, and then go straight through with a VPN. So having that concept means that you're not relying on the router necessarily being really secure in an environment, because you're reliant on zero trust to find that secure connection into an environment. So we as a bank have fared well from that. We've also been an organization that's offered flexible working right from the off. So it's suited us. And, you know, banks not traditionally set up to be able to run remotely, but I think the technology that we had in place allowed us to do that. We had the right education for the people, and that's allowed us to operate almost in a kind of what you could consider a kind of ongoing business continuity environment, so which is good.
The last question I got here for you on this segment is, how does, you know, Plurilock, we're an identity centric company, and we really focus on authentication and identity. How does identity play into your vision of cybersecurity?
Yeah, so look, many years ago, there was a forum set up called the Jericho Forum, which all talked about deperimeterization. And basically what it was saying was, that time when I was on the board of this forward-thinking organization, was that the perimeter is no longer the safeguard of the company. And you should just, you know, remember that once they've got through the perimeter, you're into this soft, chewy inside of an organization. And then it all becomes about, well, how do you protect those assets? So protecting those assets meant that you had to get security close to the assets that you were trying to protect. And then you ought to put much more emphasis on good, secure authentication of people coming into your organization. And now with people now remote working, identity has become the island of the organization. That has become the perimeter of the organization. So identity has become increasingly, you know, such a big focus. The one thing that we probably need to do much better at with authentication is this idea of passwordless authentication, and using, you know, people's biometrics in some way to authenticate themselves. We know that multi-factor authentication is one of those really strong controls. So a core element of authentication in terms of getting access to organizations. So identity has really become the focus for a lot of organizations in security.
Yeah, I agree, and that's super well said. So just a bit about building the next generation of cyber leaders, as you talked about. It's one of your passions. It's something you've obviously done a lot of work with. What are like the keys to doing that? And I guess what spurred you on to wanting to do that more? And I guess, why do you enjoy doing it so much?
Yeah, I mean, it was born of my own experience, actually, probably about 5 years ago. I was a co-founder with two other people who had similar challenge. We met in Australia just through some mutual contacts. We met up one day, we all had a coffee, had a bit of lunch, and we were chatting for such a long time. One of the longest lunches I think we've had that I can remember. And we all had the same concern about the next generation of cyber leaders coming through. And we'd all felt this ourselves, because we'd all been in the cybersecurity industry and got further along in our careers. And the transition from being a technical cybersecurity professional to becoming a professional that could thrive amongst the C-suite and board and business leaders and communicate effectively was the challenge. So a lot of the industry has been focused on, how do we get more people into cybersecurity? Because we've got a shortfall. We've got something like 4 million unfilled vacancies worldwide, which is huge. Mm-hmm. But so and it's great that there's a lot of effort being put in that. And then there's a lot of academic qualifications out there that are helping people, you know, through university, and even some qualifications like CISM and CIS and other kind of certifications that you can take. But what was lacking was some real practical skills, particularly around soft skills, stakeholder management, and being able to communicate effectively using different tools and toolkits with board, C-suite, and their peers, so that they could thrive in the C-suite. And that's what we knew that was missing. So one of our flagship programs that we pulled together was the Cyber Leadership Program, which was for aspiring Chief Information Security Officers and those senior cyber leaders. And yeah, we've got people now in over 25 countries around the world. So thousands of cyber leaders who have transitioned from being a more junior person and are now going through their careers. And the Cyber Leadership Program is really only the start of it. It's the community that's really important. And they get access to this Cyber Leadership Hub, where it's a growing community of individuals. So they're helping one another. And the communication is, when I pick up the app, and I know we've got an app and we look on it, I'm amazed at just how many people are on there live chatting and communicating with each other, so, and helping one another. So although we set out to kind of us help them, and we put these programs together to help them, they're now helping one another, which is exactly what we didn't expect to see, but exactly what we really want from this community right now. Just to finish on that as well, the other thing that we knew was a challenge as well was diversity in our industry. And we know that there's a huge skills gap, but also a huge gap in terms of addressing diversity. So we put a lot of emphasis on encouraging women onto our programs through partnering with women's institutions and forums right around the world. And we give some proactive engagement with those different communities and forums, and sometimes discount to get to try and address that and accelerate some of their cyber leadership skills. And that has become a huge focus for what we're trying to do in the Cyber Leadership Institute as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. We obviously, yeah, our industry is pretty heavily male, obviously, and there's so many amazing leaders out there that are women, and I've talked to actually a bunch on our show here, which has been fun. And that's a great initiative, and it must be so fulfilling for you to see your students or the people who are taking in your education there, like helping each other out and building that community that you talked about. Because from my own experience, I'm actually fairly new in the cyber industry, and I started working here during COVID, and it's definitely been not easy to find a community outside of my awesome team at Plurilock, which is awesome, but online with other cyber professionals. So yeah, kudos to you, and that must be an encouraging part of the work you've been putting in. Hey.
Yeah, and you know, you're exactly right. Your experience echoes pretty much everybody else that we meet. You know, they join LinkedIn, for example, and then you're trying to connect, especially with people being remote now. And what we've found is they've joined the community, but those LinkedIn connections where they need to build their kind of, you know, the number of people that they want to be connected to and build relationships with, exponentially increase because they know them through the community. Whereas it's much harder just to cold connect to somebody who you think might be able to help you because everybody's so busy. So that's been one of the huge benefits of that. And obviously, when people can see each other developing skills on one another, they can help reference them on the skills. So it's been a kind of building on each other, really, which has been fantastic to see, and I think very, very much needed. And, you know, we didn't think that it was going to be affecting many of the more junior people, but it had, because we just was focusing on this more senior level. But what we've even got people on the programs, you know, in their mid-20s, for example. And it's because there's the realization that if you still want to accelerate your career in cybersecurity, it's not just about the technical skills, it's about the soft technical, it's about the leadership and soft skills, because you have to communicate. And when you become managing people, that becomes a very different prospect from just the technical skills that are required as well.
Yeah, interesting. And just my last question, I wanted to pick your brain on, in that cyber leadership that you talked about, the soft skills that you need to be able to be in a management position. Do you feel like the boards that you might have to answer to, or the shareholders, do you think there are questions around cyber capabilities and cyber defense has changed in like the last 10 years? Obviously, do you feel like there's a bigger emphasis on that at the C level than there used to be?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, it's now a boardroom issue. I mean, you go into pretty much every board and you meet the CEO. They're pretty well educated, or most of them are very well educated, because it's very newsworthy. There isn't a day goes by without there being a major attack in, you know, and in some way. And so people will, the board members and the C-suite will always be looking at the news as they will for any business. And if they see a near miss, you know, happening to one of their competitors, they'll be asking themselves, could this happen here? Right. So no longer are the cybersecurity professionals going into that boardroom, and they're still having to do some education, but those individuals now are asking the questions of the security professionals. Could it happen here? Are we secure? Are we resilient? And really starting to get down to some of those more detailed questions. So that's the big difference that we're seeing, which is why the next generation of cyber leaders have to be adept at communicating with board members in the language that they understand. And that's the big difference. You won't get any real change in any organization without a well-equipped and well-understanding board and C-suite of what the requirements are of cybersecurity, their commitments. Because if you want to make culture change, because ultimately it's about culture change, which can take years sometimes, you need the board, who are typically responsible for culture in an organization, and the C-suite and CEO driving the message down. It has to be a top-down thing. Mm-hmm. The CISO, or even in my role, might be as charismatic as they want, but the entire company, getting back to our earlier conversation about it being everybody's responsibility, are looking to the CEO and the board for direction. Mm-hmm. So if the CEO gets it and the C-suite and that message comes down, everybody's responsibility, the impact is exponential. And that's what you're looking for. Otherwise, you're pushing sand uphill, trying to do it on your own as a cybersecurity team. So that's the big difference. And it's leveraging that broader communication set that from the top down. Yeah. And there's lots of things, we haven't got time to talk about it today, but there's lots of things that you can do to engage a board and the C-suite using things like gamification and metrics that bring it to life for them in mm-hmm. business terms, so that they can help you and ask the right questions.
Yeah, in business terms is a key
exactly
thing there. And you know, a lot of technical security people, you know, they didn't go to business school or they didn't learn these business terms in their formal education. So I'm assuming that's a lot of the work that you do at the Cyber Leadership. So on that note, if people want to find out more about the Cyber Leadership Institute, where can they find you, and where's the best place to go?
Yeah, so you can go online, www.cyberleadershipinstitute.com. You can just search on that for online through Google. Yeah. We do have an app on the App Store and Google, which is Cyber Leaders. So you could search in Cyber Leaders and it'll bring up the app. The app is the Cyber Leadership Hub, which is the community. So you can just download it there. You can register your interest. There's a couple of questions to ask. If you get through those questions, you're straight in. It's not difficult to get in. They're basically trying to understand what you want to get from the community and how you want to help. And obviously just looking at your LinkedIn profile to see if you're in security or somebody who's aspiring to get into security. So they're the two ways. You can find us on Instagram as well. If you did a search on Cyber Leadership Institute, you can find us on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably a really good way for everybody that's already on LinkedIn. Again, you'll find me on there, Darren Argyle. If you do a search for my name, connect with me. And we've got the Cyber Leadership Institute as a company on there, so you can register on there, and there's lots of information that's shared on there.
Brilliant. That's great. It sounds like you guys are in a lot of spaces where younger people who are, you know, aspiring to be the next generation of cyber leaders are. So I'm sure that's not by accident. I appreciate you joining the show today, Darren. It was great to learn a little bit more about you and your couple different roles, and yeah, some really interesting work you're doing there with the next generation of leaders, which is also super important.
Thank you. Cheers, Stephen.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the show today. Stay tuned to our YouTube page and make sure you subscribe, as we have a lot more great interviews coming up. It's been great to chat. Thanks, Darren. We'll see you guys all next time.